All right, let's get into it. We're about to dive into this incredible story of conviction versus power. It's a tale from way back in history, but it asks a question about integrity and truth that's just as relevant today.
So let me ask you this. Can just one person with nothing but their beliefs really stand up to the most powerful empire of their time and actually win? That's the epic question at the heart of the story we're exploring today.
Okay, so our story revolves around this one man, Imam Ahmed ibn Hambal. His name would eventually become a symbol of resilience. Now, back in 9th century Baghdad, he was one of the most respected scholars around, but he had no idea he was about to face the single biggest test of his entire life. So you've got this one man's faith on one side, and on the other, the immense, overwhelming power of the Abbasid Caliphate, an empire at the absolute peak of its power. And this wasn't some quiet, private disagreement. Oh no. This was about to blow up into a very public trial of one man's conscience.
So, you're probably wondering, what was this huge fight even about? Well, it all started with a really complex theological debate called Khalk al-Quran, which basically means the creation of the Quran. What started as a kind of philosophical idea was about to get turned into a weapon by the state.
And to make sure everyone fell in line, the state set up something called the Mihna. Think of it as a formal, state-sponsored inquisition. In fact, the word mihna literally means ordeal or test. And its whole purpose was to force every single scholar and judge in the empire to submit.
So let's break down the actual disagreement, right? On one side, you had the traditional belief. The Quran is the eternal, uncreated word of God. But the state, which was really into this rationalist school of thought called the Mu'tazila, started pushing a new idea, that the Quran was a created thing. Now, to us today, that might sound like a tiny academic difference, but back then, this was a massive, world-shaking change to their core beliefs.
And this is where it all turned into a full-blown crisis. See, the Caliph, Ma'mun al-Rashid, was a big fan of Greek philosophy and science. He thought this new, rationalist idea was the perfect way to modernize religion and, bring all religious authority under his control. So, he just declared it the mandatory official belief of the empire, just like that. And suddenly, disagreeing on theology wasn't just a debate anymore, it was treason.
So now we get to the moment of truth. The decree goes out, scholars all over the empire are being tested, and then the order arrives for Imam Ahmed. The choice is simple, but it's terrifying. Conform and stay safe, or refuse and face the absolute full wrath of the empire.
And what was his response? He was completely unwavering. The Quran is the word of God, and it is uncreated. I will not abandon the truth at any cost. I mean, you can't get much clearer than that. His refusal was firm, and it put him on a direct collision course with the most powerful man in his world.
And that one act of refusal, it kicked off an ordeal that wasn't going to be over in a few days or a few months. We're talking about a long, brutal period of unbelievable suffering. This was his mihna, his test, and it was going to last for over a decade.
And look, this wasn't just the whim of one ruler who'd eventually be gone. The Inquisition kept going across the reigns of 3 different caliphs, one after the other. It started with Ma'mun, got even worse under al-Mu'tasim, and was then continued by al-Wathiq. This was a long-term institutional campaign.
15. Just think about that number for a second. 15 years. For 15 years, Imam Ahmed went through this trial. 15 years of pressure, of punishment, of prison, all for sticking to one single belief.
So what did those 15 years actually look like for him? Well, he was constantly being dragged to court. He was thrown into the dungeons of Baghdad. He was publicly flogged, whipped in front of everyone, all to break his spirit. And on top of all that physical pain, there was this constant, crushing psychological pressure, day in and day out, to just give in.
His resolve was just unbelievable. The historical accounts tell us he was whipped so badly that he would literally pass out from the pain. But every single time he woke up, his answer was exactly the same. The Quran is uncreated. They could break his body, but his conviction, that never, ever wavered. But after all those years of darkness, something started to shift. The tide finally began to turn, leading to a pretty stunning conclusion to this whole ordeal, the victory of truth.
So what happened? A new ruler came along. A new caliph, al-Mutawakkil, took power, and he completely rejected the policies of the 3 caliphs who came before him. He officially ended the Mihna. Just like that, the Inquisition was finally over.
And when the Mihna ended, Imam Ahmed wasn't just let go. No,
he was released with full honors. I mean, think about that. The very same state that had tortured and imprisoned him for 15 years was now publicly admitting he was right, vindicating everything he stood for.
Can you just imagine that moment? He walks out of that prison, not as a broken man, but as an absolute hero. He was met by the sea of people, massive crowds, who saw him as the defender of their faith. In that moment, he went from being an enemy of the state to a lasting symbol of integrity for the entire Islamic world.
Okay, so this all happened in the 9th century. Why are we still talking about it? What makes it matter today? Let's break down the powerful lessons we can take from his incredible journey.
There are really 3 huge takeaways here. First, it's about having the courage to stand for what you believe is true, even when you're under massive pressure. Second, it shows that a scholar's real job is to protect the faith, not to please the people in power. And maybe most importantly, it teaches us that real strength doesn't come from physical power. It comes from principles you refuse to give up.
And here's the bottom line, the really crucial outcome of all this. His sacrifice had a huge long-term impact. Because he refused to break the orthodox belief that the Quran is the uncreated word of God, it became cemented as the mainstream view for the vast majority of Muslims, and it still is today. Think about it. One man's stand literally shaped centuries of theology.
So we're going to end right where we started, with a question for you. Imam Ahmed's trial was in 9th century Baghdad, sure, but his story kind of challenges every single one of us, in any generation. In our world today, with all of its own unique pressures and powerful forces, what does it really mean to stand for truth? Something to think about. Thanks for